Hey everybody, KMO here, and yesterday I did a video in which I raised from seeming obscurity the phrase which was quite common when I was younger, sounds like a personal problem. You say that when somebody is describing a problem and you want to let them know, look, this is not a group problem, this is not a systemic issue, this is your stuff, you deal with it. Now, on its face, I mean, just using the words, the phrase, sounds like a personal problem. Even if you're making a valid point, it's still callous, it's still harsh, I would say it's rude. It's not a sympathetic thing to say, even when it's true. You know, some problems are for all of us to solve and some are for individuals, and this one is yours. One other thing that this phrase communicates is that we're not that tight. We're not that close. We're not so close that, just a sense of empathy from me makes your problems into my problems. Your problems are your problems, and I can live with you suffering with them rather than, exert my own effort to try to help you. Sounds like a personal problem. Often a smart thing to think, rarely a compassionate thing to say, unless you're just really committed to that tough love. So another thing about sounds like a personal problem. There are systemic issues that need to be addressed, and then there are problems that are the results of individuals' choices, and the individuals can remedy their situation by, making different choices or doing things differently. There is some overlap. Like, I'm Generation X, as I'm sure you're well aware, because I say it all the time. I have Gen X peers who did what their baby boomer parents modeled for them and succeeded. They are now living basically the 20th century boomer existence, because they got in on the tail end of that. Then there are the artists and gypsies and vagabonds like me who haven't committed to any particular path, or, the path that they had committed to was unrealistic, and they turned down opportunities, for the more stable, normal, run-of-the-mill 20th century middle-class baby boomer prosperity. And so I'm probably doing a little bit better than the Zoomers out there for the most part, but largely I'm faring about as well as the millennials are faring financially. In terms of sex and romance, though, while I need to stress this, because it's going to sound like I'm bragging here in a minute, but when I was in my 20s and Randy is all get out, horny on Main, I think is what they say now, I experienced long periods of no sex, involuntary celibacy. I wanted to have sex and I wasn't getting any. I also was in relationships where I was unhappy, even though there was sex and the sex was pretty good. There were other parts of the relationship that were definitely unsatisfactory, and led to painful breakups. For every happy relationship I had a painful breakup as well. And the first ones were the worst, because I was the youngest, least experienced, my hormones and emotions were through the roof, and whatever I was feeling, man, I was really feeling it. When you're really feeling that good sex, well, yay, that's amazing. When you're really feeling that, breakup heartbreak, so there is an advantage to getting older and feeling everything less intensely. All right. I'm going to start off with some feedback from a fellow YouTube creator who's doing better than I am in terms of views, and comments and all that good stuff. In terms of metrics, he's doing better than I am here on YouTube. I think maybe in terms of life satisfaction, I got the better deal. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. First writes, great analysis as always. Well, this is sobering. I got so tired of hearing that one of my problems was personal when recent statistics were saying otherwise, to the point of spending hundreds of dollars and hours in making a 2-hour documentary, having never done video editing or YouTube before. Okay. I'm going to pause there. It's a much longer email, but it reminds me of the point I started to make and didn't complete. Personal problems, systemic problems that affect a lot of people, they overlap. For some people fall victim to social pressures, systemic problems while their peers do quite well. That's in the overlap zone. But, as the systemic issue grows, there are more and more people affected by it. More and more people are looking for a systemic explanation for their problems and a systemic solution, or, at least approach to mediating those problems. But, and this is universal, it doesn't matter what the topic is, but in this video we're talking about access to sex. For the ever-shrinking minority of people who are still doing well, they have a strong motivation to say that this systemic issue which is affecting you is really your personal problem, that you need to fix, and that I, on the winning side, have no responsibility for helping you fix. You could be doing as well as I'm doing if you had done what I had done. That's the attitude. So, when systemic issues are causing personal problems for a lot of people, if you have a story which explains to the people who are still well off why the vast majority of people are failing because it's their own fault or because they're crazy, people will pay you to hear this, justifying story. So there was a doctor who in 1851, he coined the term tripetomania, which was his name for the mental illness which caused slaves to free captivity. The idea was, black people are not as smart as white people. They're not really capable of taking care of themselves out in free society. If they're not going back to Africa and they're not working on the plantation, there really aren't a lot of options for them. So it makes no sense for them to try to run away from captivity. They must be crazy. Well, the particular kind of crazy is tripetomania. It is the irrational desire to run away. So as I say, Gen X was the first post-World War II generation that wasn't hitting the same life mile markers that the previous generations had thought of as being normal. Most notably, getting married, owning a house, having children, and to some degree, moving from just a regular old job to, into a career. But back in the fat years after World War II, you could just get a plain old job, and, an entry-level job didn't require a college education, and you could make a middle-class living from that. So, the whole job-career distinction wasn't as big a deal then, whereas today, if you're just doing a regular job, one that doesn't require any particular credentials, doesn't require any particular technical skills, you're just fucked. I mean, if you stay in that job in perpetuity, you will be in your mid-30s living with 3 or 4 of your age cohort peers as roommates, no family, no career prospects, really just a stagnant life in many respects. Now, you might really enjoy skiing, and your job might, allow you to get to the slopes from time to time if you live in a place, that it doesn't involve a lot of travel to get to the slopes. But, that's just one example. There are satisfactions to be had in that life, but they're not the same satisfactions that people who, in their 20s, get married, buy a house, start a family, and embark on a career. The pleasures that you get in your... used to be Gen X, now it's Gen X, Millennial, Gen Z, slacker lifestyle, they're going to be kind of esoteric. They might be as esoteric as occult practices. All right. So I put together a whiteboard full of notes, and I haven't touched any of them yet. And I can't show you a picture of the whiteboard because it has actual people's names on it, people that I'll just be referring to as numbers. So back to First's comments. He put a lot of money and a lot of time into making a 2-hour documentary. I just watched it this morning. It looks great. It was time well spent. Don't know what your financial situation is. I don't know if spending hundreds of dollars is, within the realm of reasonableness for you, but it's a good video. Link in the description. Everybody go watch it. First continues. Turns out that now I am getting lots of others reaching out with the same issues with the world we live in. So this is a video mostly about dating apps, but about the whole changed dating scene where, particularly with dating apps, most women are not interested in average men. And most of the women on the dating apps are only responding to or only seeking the attention of, the best looking men, the top 20%, with the bottom 80% basically just absolutely wasting their time. And First gets into some research that demonstrates that the dating app companies are not only aware of this, but they are cynically taking advantage of it basically monetizing male frustration in the realm of love, sex, and dating. And if it makes them money, they're going to do what they can to promote it, to promote its increase. First continues, now this is just more confirmation for my conclusion that my personal problem, in quotes, my personal problem, is overwhelmingly becoming the experience of a large portion of the population. I was surprised that even James Howard Kunstler will be writing his next work on a topic close to this. By the way, KMO, if you want to check it out, I would more than appreciate it. You have been one of the motivators in my life ever since I graduated high school to this point. So it's thinkers on the internet like you who have inspired me. Please let me know what you think. Well done. What criticisms I have, I will reserve for a private conversation if you want to have it. But on the whole, remarkable. Very well made video. Good on you. So, one of the points that First makes, and he's quoting lots of other people who have come to the same conclusion, is that if you are a man and you have zero dating life going on right now, the worst thing you can do is get on a dating app. Dating apps are really good for expanding the choices of guys who are already doing well in that area. But if you're not already doing well, one, you're not going to get noticed, and two, the ratio of men to women on dating apps is ridiculous. It's not the same for every app, and it's not the same in every country, but it's on the order of 1 woman to every 5 to 7 men. I mean, it's ridiculous. And only the top tier guys are getting any attention whatsoever from the women on the app. Most of the men are just spending lots of time swiping, and never getting any responses, never getting any interactions with women whatsoever. And then if they actually do get on a date, if the date goes nowhere, for the man, the date was a failure. If the date goes nowhere, and it's the woman's choice that it goes nowhere, she sits there with the guy for a couple hours, he pays attention to her, her needs are being met in that interaction. She's having attention paid to her. If, the night ends without so much as a kiss, much less sex, no problem for her for the most part. Whereas for the man, not only has he wasted his time on the app, but now he's wasted his time in real life, and he's wasted his money on the date, and, it's just more frustration. So that got me thinking. I've had dating profiles on a couple of, dating sites before, but never with a smartphone. This was, I think I probably had a smartphone the last time I was on one of these things, but I didn't use the smartphone interface. I don't know the experience. I don't have the muscle memory of the swiping that people do on dating apps. And people talk about swiping left and swiping right, and I'm not clear which is which. And I don't need to know. You don't need to explain it to me because I'm never going to interact with these things. I have zero interest in smartphone-based dating apps. So I got to thinking about how did I meet, the significant others in my life. And I won't throw out, general numbers for number of encounters, sexual encounters with women, for fear that it will sound crass or it will sound like bragging. But, I think for guys like First, it would be an irritating number to hear. I'm 52. I was a teenager and a young adult in the 1980s. Very different world. Pre-World Wide Web. There was an internet, but, nobody who wasn't in the military or a college professor was on it. There was no World Wide Web. There were no mobile phones that normal people carried around. It was just a completely different world. And one of the points of the documentary is that in a world where, a woman carries around in her pocket a little piece of glass, plastic, and metal, which connects her potentially with every man on the planet, you get a very different dynamic than when you had to choose your mate from the local pool of candidates. Because compared to the local pool of candidates, even a mediocre person, male or female, has some attributes. But if you were served up a buffet on your smartphone of more faces than you could possibly look at in a day, well, then your standards rise dramatically. But the weird dynamic with the smartphone dating apps is that you get a lot of good-looking men who, if you were just drawing from the local scene, they would be stars. They'd be doing great. You get a lot of men like this throwing themselves, desperately seeking the attention and access to the genitals of, I don't want to be crass, but mediocre women, mediocre at best. Like, guys are definitely having to aim down to have any hope of, scoring with the dating apps, whereas women get to aim up. And In the documentary, he makes a lot of reference to a term hypergamy, which, I asked the Amazon device what that means, and originally it meant Indian women marrying in a higher caste. But generally it just means women, shooting higher when it comes to dating and marriage and whatnot. So, we don't have castes, not explicit castes here in the United States, but we certainly have economic classes. And so, a woman from modest means or a modest origin marrying a rich man, that's the fantasy, right? That's Pretty Woman, that's 50 Shades of Grey. Really what you want is the billionaire. Well, the whole dating app experience conditions the women to shoot for the billionaires or, the guys who have billion-dollar looks. Okay, so in my youth, before I started lifting weights, I was just a doughy guy, probably a good-looking face underneath the dough, but, not so much. But I was smart and I was articulate. And most of my earlier sexual experiences were the woman chose me. I was presented with the opportunity to have sex and I took it up, but it certainly wasn't me pursuing it in any sort of, informed fashion and succeeding. After I started working out, my body changed and I had certain advantages. And, I think particularly to my college peers, I got an irritating amount of sex with some very nice looking women. But I wanted to say, I went through my memories and I basically boiled down my sex, romance, dating, and marriage life to 5 people. These are the big 5 significant others. So number 1, we'll just call her number 1. I met in college. Not my first girlfriend, not the first woman I had sex with, but this was the first time that I was in love with a woman, she was in love with me, I was attracted to her, she was attracted to me, and we were having regular sex, and it was great. That was my first. And we were in college, we lived in dorms, her dorm was near mine, we ate in meal halls together. But how did it get started? It got started by me nervously and awkwardly approaching her and asking her out on a date. It was a real life, face-to-face, cold walk up, and it worked. I was quite nervous in this initial walk up, but it worked. So, next one. And let me just reiterate, every great relationship I've had in my life is over. And, they all involve some pain in the end of it. The worst pain was probably the second to last because it was the marriage. There were kids involved. There was ugly court proceedings. It was bad. But in general, the older I get, the less a breakup affects me. So the first one, when that went south, that was the worst. And unfortunately, because the good times were so good, we got back together repeatedly and broke up repeatedly. So it was a barrel of fun in terms of that pain. Number 2. We'll call her number 2, although not that number 2, just second in the list. I met her at a club in Japan. So in Japan, I don't know if it's still the case, but in the 90s, white and black guys who went to live in Japan had their choice of women because Japanese men, for the most part, had 0 social skills, 0 dating skills. And, foreign guys were also exotic, so the more adventuresome women would seek them out. So you had your choice. But I met Ms. Number 2 in a club in Nagoya, Japan, met on the dance floor. I was actually interested in a different woman on the dance floor, and I was dancing with this other woman, but then this other woman, her friends left, and this woman who turned out to be a very significant person in my life approached me, and, we ended up making out that night and got together later, and it became a long and glorious relationship, which ended in heartache. Number 3 on the list. This is my late 20s. I'm working at Amazon.com. I live in Seattle, and I went to a rave with some friends. But my friends who were from out of town and were not really comfortable with the scene, they saw that people were getting searched at the door and they had weed on them, and I had already taken ecstasy. So there was no way I was going to bail. And I didn't realize that my friends had bailed until I'd been there for a while. And I looked around, I realized they weren't there. So I'm at a rave by myself on ecstasy, start dancing with some girl, and, we end up making out, but no sex that first night because, we didn't go home. We ended up actually going out to breakfast later because it was a rave and we were on drugs and we were up all night. But, later there was sex and a relationship, and it went on for a couple of years. And even though I'm the one who ended it, it still ended badly. It still hurt to end that relationship, even though I'm the one who initiated the ending. But I hope you're seeing the pattern here. Cold walk up, met on the dance floor. Actually, 2 at this point are meet on the dance floor. Number 4 in the list is the woman I ended up marrying. Again, this is not a complete list. This is just, the big ones. We were married for 9 years, together for some time before we got married. So basically a decade of my life went into that. We have 2 children together. That's the biggie, and that one ended spectacularly badly. And I take, full credit for my spectacular mistakes and, my contribution to that spectacular burnout and, destruction. And then finally, number 5 is my most recent girlfriend, and she lives here in Bellows Falls. We moved here together from New York. We had lived together for 5 years. We're still on pretty good terms. She's the only one on this list that I'm in contact with. I mean, I only communicate with my ex-wife through texts. And it's very simple, cut and dried, matter-of-fact exchange of logistical data because we have kids together. And that is all. With number 5, I'm still on good terms with her. She's still a friend of mine, and we hang out. So I'm going to say as little as possible about number 5, other than how we met. She was a listener to my podcast. And then I was going to be in New York City, and I, just put out the word to various people who listened to the podcast who I knew were in New York City, hey, let's meet up. And a few did, and she was one of them. And, we ended up living together for 5 years and moving from Brooklyn to Vermont together. So that last one was internet mediated, but it wasn't a dating app. It was just, I was visible to somebody. There was a parasocial relationship that became, a just regular social relationship. As I say, I have been on a couple of dating services. I had profiles. I don't think I ever met up with anybody in real life that I met first on a dating app or a dating service. I did run an ad, a personal ad in The Stranger, which is a weekly newspaper in Seattle while I lived there. And I did hook up with one person from that. Disaster. If you're frustrated by your lack of sexual encounters, romantic pairings with women, however you want to describe it, if that lack is a frustration for you, avoid dating apps like the plague. They are there to capitalize and exacerbate your frustration. What dating apps have done is they've turned the whole world into Alaska. When I left college, I needed a grub stake to get over to Japan, and so I went and I worked in Alaska for the summer on fishing boats. And what I heard again and again about dating in Alaska was, men outnumber women by a vast number in the places where the fishing industry takes place. These are remote places. If you're not working in the fishing industry, there's not much to do there. And couples who come to Alaska and go to these areas, they never last because the woman has her choice of all these men, and all of these men are highly motivated, to seek her out and to, pull her out from the relationship she's in. And the guy has no prospects at all. So dating apps have kind of turned the whole world into Alaska, where it is the woman's buffet. But, in the short term, and this is sort of the Paul Joseph Watson, I saw a little cringe of cringe when I mention his name, but he does make the occasional good point. And a regular talking point of his is that, young women might have lots of easy sexual encounters with a wide variety of good-looking men now, but it's not going to last. When you get into your 30s and 40s, the men are still going to be looking at women in their 20s, and you'll be competing with women who are actually in their 20s. Good luck with that. But one piece of advice that occurs to me, and I can't really offer it as advice because I haven't tried it out, it just seems like it might be a workable approach, is to seek out socially conservative women. Women who still adhere to the idea that there's a negative value to be attached to promiscuity. Statistics that Paul Joseph Watson likes to cite say that women who get married early and have their children early tend to have more fulfilling lives, on the whole, than women who don't form any familial attachments in their 20s and wait, and prioritize adventure, travel, career, whatever, and never really form a pair bond, a lasting familial pair bond in their 20s. In terms of life satisfaction, they'll probably make more money over the course of their lives, but in terms of, total psychological satisfaction, they're not going to do nearly as well as the conservative women who marry early, stay married to the same guy, have kids with him, and, get the child rearing over and done with so that they get to be still fairly young, when their kids are grown. I've had sex with socially conservative women. I've never been interested in forming a long-lasting relationship with them. One other thing, it seems like it's worth mentioning. I'm not sure how it fits into this whole thing, but when I was thinking about, the 5 women to talk about from my past in this video, what they all had in common was these were long-lasting relationships. These were long-lasting sexual relationships. And what I've learned through experience is that the best sex you're going to have is going to be with a familiar partner. Somebody that, the relationship is still new, you're still excited, it's still the honeymoon phase, but you know them, they know you, you know what gets them off, you know them well enough to have effective sex. The first few times that you have sex with them, it's likely to be awkward. Maybe you'll both get off. I mean, there's no danger of the man not getting off for the most part, but maybe you'll both reach that vaunted climax, but it'll still be awkward. What I've discovered is that people who are great the first time are often crazy. They're people who want to hook you with great sex the first time so you'll keep coming back and not see just how insane they are, until it's too late, which is to say until your lives have intertwined and pulling apart will be painful. So, great sex the first time it happens is happened for me, but, even at a young age, I kind of came to this realization that if it's great the first time, put your hand on your wallet and walk away, because they're probably nuts. All right, the longer the video, the more time I have to spend in editing, so I'm done. But thanks very much to First for his comment and for directing me to his documentary. I enjoyed watching it, and obviously it gave me something to think and talk about. All right, I will talk to you all later. Stay well.